how to nail an interview. How to nail an interview. Over to you, David, if you want to invite Jackson.
Well, with that, thank you, Namrita. So, with his speech on the topic of, please welcome Jackson Green with his speech on how to nail a job interview. How to nail a job interview. Jackson Green.
Thanks, David. How many of you struggle with job interviews? Put up your hand nice and high. I can only see a couple of hands, so I suspect that not everyone's being truthful, but I'm very thankful to those who raised their hands. I want you to imagine for a moment that we sum up all of the people that raised their hands and we quantify that by 1 billion. That total figure is how terrible I was at job interviews only a short time ago. But this all changed after a visit to a careers counsellor. Some of you may have heard this story before, but before I give my talk tonight, I want to really get you to picture just how bad I was at job interviews. So in 2017, I completed a bachelor's degree at Monash University. And I was faced with the challenge. What's next? Well, what was next was an epic struggle of failure when I responded and applied to job after job after job. And all I received in response was, "Dear Jackson, thank you for your application. We regret to inform you that you are unsuccessful on this occasion. Please try again in the future." Now, I did learn a valuable lesson from this. If you're ever given an email that starts with "thanks for your application," shut it off and don't open it. You'll save yourself a myriad of disappointment. And I was left with despair and confusion. I thought, why? Why am I failing at job applications and job interviews? As it turns out, there was a very good reason for this. I went and saw a careers counsellor and we practiced a couple of interview questions. And I wish I was making this up. I wish I was joking, but this was word for word some of the responses I gave. The first question began as follows: "Jackson, what are your main skills, your main strengths?" I work hard, I'm dedicated, I work hard, and did I mention that I work hard? But if you thought that was bad, check out the next question and the next answer. So why should a company or employer hire you? I don't know. I don't think they should. Probably not the answer you want to give when trying to sell yourself. And then we had the third question, and this was the catalyst for my life-changing moment. "Jackson, what are your main weaknesses?" Oh, finally, an easy question. I talk too much. I get distracted easily. I like to take regular breaks. I won't really. And at this point, he stopped me and said, "Jackson, how can you expect others to hire and take a chance on someone who doesn't even believe in themselves?" And this sent me down a path of reflection. I needed to redefine and reassess how I approached interviews, but I also needed to summon the courage to explore myself internally and figure out what I had to offer to organizations. And the 4 tips that I'm going to share with you tonight are how to nail a job interview. Just before I do that though, long story short, after going on this journey and undergoing this process, the next job interview I went for, I absolutely nailed. I got the job and I've been coaching Manessa and Catherine how to nail job interviews ever since, and they've now got jobs. So I can probably take the credit for that as well. I'll now share with you my first tip for how to nail a job interview, and that is know your worth. And this is very important. It relates to self-confidence. You should understand what your skills are and what you have to offer.
Jackson, are you giving the most important things first or at the end?
That's a very good question, David. Very good question. I actually consider them equally important, and I'll explain why at the end, but I do want to say that these 4 steps are very much interrelated. And so you should try to take note of each of them because they are, as I mentioned, related, but they're all integral. I mean, if you do 2 of them really well and omit the other 2 variables, you'll really struggle. So that's an excellent question. And I want you, when writing down these tips, because you should be writing down everything I say, as I am a brilliant speaker, when you write down these tips, put a little note at the bottom that says equally important. Excellent question, David. I'll now proceed to the first tip, which is, as I mentioned, know your worth. And I want to proceed to the next part of this tip, which is, yes, have confidence. Yes, have an understanding of your ability, but what you also need to do is don't settle for something that you are better than. I know a lot of people, when they graduate university, they go after the first job they can find and they're so keen and they're like, yay, I got a job. And I've looked at their contracts and they've told me stories of the abusive conditions they encounter. And I was horrified to hear some people working back until midnight or 2 a.m. not getting paid for going overtime. There was also a very amusing job advertisement that I saw on a Facebook page called Monash Toastmasters. And on that page, it read as follows: internship advertisement, $15 an hour, data entry. And down the bottom, it had a little clause that said paid internship. This means you pay us to work for us and work long hours. And I was absolutely mortified that there were people even considering this opportunity. And if you've spent 6 years studying a bachelor's and master's degree and honours degree, even more, you shouldn't be spending all that money on a job that doesn't justify the work you have put in. So just remember, know your worth and don't settle for something that is not worthless, but that is so far beneath you, it's not even worth contemplating.
Jackson,
Yes.
Jackson, do you think that, fake it till you make it type works in interviews? What do you have to say about that?
I think it depends. It's an excellent question, and it's something I've thought about a lot because I once attended an interview and I was so nervous that I tried to really research and come up with questions that I expected to be asked. And what happened is I got some feedback at the end of the interview that said my answers didn't come across as genuine. It just sounded like I was reciting what the interviewer wanted to hear. So I think fake it until you make it doesn't quite cut it. I mean, of course, there are times when you do want to really sell yourself, and there are times when you will exaggerate. But I would advise against being fake and not being genuine, because that will get caught out at some point, whether or not it be at the interview or even when you get the job and your performance isn't quite up to scratch. So again, a brilliant question, and take note, everyone, that is something worth reflecting on. My next point is to do with research. When you attend an interview, it's very important to research the company. Quite often, the very first question interviewers ask is, what do you know about us? And if you say nothing, or sorry, mate, I've got nothing to add, they won't be overly pleased. They'll probably think that you're ill-prepared, not committed to the role, not committed to the company, and not a good long-term candidate. And that's probably true for someone who attends an interview and doesn't have anything to say about the company. They should also look at the position. I had a friend who attended an interview with a sales company and he didn't look at the position description and he had no idea what the actual position was. And he walked out of the job. He interviewed quite well. He accepted the job. And then he found that it was a commission-only sales role. And he lasted about 1 week before saying, this isn't what I intended to sign up for. So if you take the time to gather
Jackson,
an
can I just
appreciation,
ask,
yes.
you're talking a lot about the questions that you're being asked and the answers you're giving, but could you also share with us questions you think that we should ask when we're being interviewed, the top questions to ask potential employers?
That is a fascinating question. And I'm so glad you asked that, because it actually ties into my next point, which is take an interest. So I will do that, and I'll answer that very succinctly right now. My third point was take an interest. And this means at the end of every interview, on probably 99% of opportunities, the employer will ask you, do you have any questions for us? And that's your chance. That's your chance to say, yes, I do have questions, and ask them insightful questions which show them that you are interested in that company specifically. Because let's say you're like Vanessa and you study engineering and you attend an interview at a particular company. There are thousands of companies that want engineers. And so why should they specifically take this graduate? That's what this opportunity is about. And so I normally prepare 3 questions. And the first is, if I'm successful, what is my day-to-day schedule going to be? Because it is important to get an understanding and a feel of how you specifically fit into that company, and that shows interest in what you'll be doing. I also think other questions like, what are your most important values? Usually companies have a list of values. And if you ask that, it shows that it gives them an opportunity to show their values and see how they align with yours. But it shows that you've done some research and taken an interest.
Jackson, if you have done your research, don't you think you should know what the values are of the company? I think it's a bit contradictory with the previous statement of doing the research.
You should. I wouldn't say so much that it's contradictory. I would say that it ties in. You are right. You absolutely should do that. But then you should not only research the values, you should also include that in a question format. And I'll tell you why. It's all well and good to say, I've done my research. And usually when they ask you, tell us what you know about the company, you may or may not discuss the values. But this is a chance to get a more in-depth two-way dialogue about these values. It's wonderful to say, I know Commonwealth's values are excellence, service, accountability. But if you then take that initiative further and pose that in a question and say, how do you use these values and why do you regard them as important? That shows that A, you've done your research and you're prepared, but it shows that you have a specific interest in the company as well, and that you want to be there in the long term. And that's the image you want to convey. It's not so much, I want a job, give me money. That won't get you very far. It's, I want to succeed in this company. I want to be a part of this company. Let's discuss this. Yeah.
Share the response that actually got you a first job.
What was that? Sorry, I only heard half of that question.
Can you actually share the response that got you a job?
When you say response, do you mean the response to a particular interview question?
A particular question, like, yeah.
All right. What I'll do is I'll share with you my response, and this ties into do your research, to the question I was asked about the company. When I was asked what I knew about the company, I listed the values, and I also said this company has been in the field of finance, because this was a finance company, for 50 years. It has offices all around Australia, and I listed the capital cities, Sydney, Canberra, Brisbane, and its sole purpose and its main purpose is to benefit members. And then I listed the ways that it benefits members, which including lowering fees on a regular basis. And when I mentioned that, it blew some of the interviewers away, because I even gave the percentage points showing that the fees used to be, I think it was 1.5%, and eventually it dropped to 0.85%. And even the senior manager who was on the panel of interviewers didn't know that. And that's what really got me over the line, because I was listing facts about the company that not even some of the senior managers knew. So it's always important when you do your research, sure, use the website, but also use reports, articles, and anything else you can find that will support your response. So we've gone through three.
I have a question here, Jackson. So I think it's right. I mean, we need to prepare, doing research, getting prepared for interview. But on the other hand, sometimes an interviewer might not want to see like everything is well prepared. I mean, they want to test your potential. I mean, for those unexpected situations. So what's your comment for that?
That's a wonderful question. And I'm so glad you asked that again, because that ties into the final and fourth point I have tonight, which is to do with examples. It's great to be prepared. It's great to do research, but the best thing you can do to showcase your ability to answer interview questions, which are pretty similar to table topics questions if you think of it, is to elaborate with examples. And there's a saying in philosophy, if you can't show it, you aren't it. And the same goes for interviews. If you can demonstrate your knowledge by sharing an example, for instance, I have excellent attention to detail, and I can prove this by exemplifying a time when I was given 1,000 stock prices to analyze, and I was able to dissect each one and pick out the most important stocks. Here, we're using an example. So we're not just well prepared, we're able to speak off the cuff and support what we're saying. So this was my talk tonight. These were the 4 points. Yes, David?
Jackson, it doesn't sound like you think networking is very important.
What's that, sorry?
It doesn't sound like you think that networking is very important.
I think networking is very important, but the best opportunity for networking, I feel, is after you've got the job, because sure, in the interview room, you should be aiming to build a good rapport with the interviewer by using these 4 tips. But if you then go one step further once you're in the company and approach people, whether it be employees or senior managers, and say, here's what I have to offer. And that's really important in networking. It's not so much do this, do this, do this for me. It's what can I do for you, and how can we combine our knowledge and our insight together? Excellent question, David. I hope that my 4 points of know your worth, use examples, and do your research, as well as the other point about taking an interest, were all of excellent use to you. And if you apply this knowledge, you too can become expert interview candidates, just like myself, Manessa, and Catherine. Back to you.
Thank you.